guys, it's Julian, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make hard industrial rave techno in the style of MRD, Brecc, WNDRLST, this sort of style of very aggressive and hard-hitting stuff that still has that kind of ravey, like 90s influence in there. As usual, you can get the full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available at the top of the description on my Bandcamp, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available, and let's get started. Alright, so, first thing we have up here is the distorted kick, which sounds like this. So yeah, these are the style of very hard, distorted, like 90s hard techno, almost like a hard style type of kick. And actually, a lot of the techniques here to make this are hard styling techniques. So you'll see that as we get in there. But yeah, I want to show you guys how to make this. This style of kick is not in every track by these people. It's not like this is just every single time this is the kick that they're making. A lot of times they're using different like reverb rumbles and stuff like that. But there's really not a lot of information out there about how to make these kicks. Of course, you can find some guide of some dude on the Gear Sluts forum telling you like, oh yeah, just get a 909 kick, put a distortion pedal on it, and you'll have that sound. But it's really not just that. There's a little bit more to it. So today, I'm going to show you how to really go in and do it. And so, essentially, it's two layers. It's the distorted bass, and then it is the actual, kick. So you need these to be separated, because that's kind of the first thing here that you're going to notice once you start distorting your 909. Is that you don't really get the punch. Once you, distort something, it tends to flatten it out a little bit. And we can talk all day about how that's happening because of the waveform being compressed and all that. But yeah, you're just not really going to get a lot of punch when you distort something like this. So we have one layer to do just the distortion and one layer to do just the punch. So the way that I made the distortion is using a 909 kick. So as you can see, this kick 909 here, you may recognize that sample. It's actually Ableton's 909 kick. So I have this here, and I'm doing it with Ableton's 909 just to show you that you don't actually need a 909. You don't need to go out and buy a 909 or a Roland TR8 or anything like that. You can pretty much do this with almost any 909 kick sample. Of course, yes, that has to be recorded from an actual 909. But you don't have to go out and get a 909 yourself. You can do this literally just with the default one that every version of Ableton comes with, essentially. And so what it's going to come down to is it is distortion like I described, but there's a little bit more finesse to it. So I'm just going to turn everything off and kind of go from scratch here and just show you the process of how I would do this. Which, as you can see, there's a bit of processing on this. Usually I try to keep my sounds so that they sound good without processing, and then the processing is just kind of tying it all together. But this is not one of those types of sounds. So here's the dry kick. Then we compress it a little bit. Which the reason why we're doing this is just because with the compression, you want to kind of flatten. I'm actually going to turn that release up. You want to kind of flatten the sound out a little bit, because if you don't do this, what's going to happen is you're going to do all the distortion, you're going to have the sound set up, but then it's just going to be it's going to be really kind of quick versus getting a nice boom that can really kind of boom like that. That's what you're trying to get, and the compression is going to help with that. And then the first thing that we have here, so we have this rack here where you can see there's this distortion happening, but you'll notice if I just turn on the distortion, you end up with that. And that's usually what people end up with when they try to do the thing I was describing where okay, yeah, just get a 909 and put a distortion pedal on it. Well, this is why you can't just do that. It's because of the fact that this isn't really the sound, Because what tends to happen, essentially distortion, as you know, it's just adding harmonic content on top of the sound. So it can tend to do that kind of unevenly. And so essentially what you're hearing here is you're hearing the low mid-range, kind of those boom frequencies are getting louder and distorted more than the highs and the mids. So what we have to do is shape the sound going into the distortion and then shape the sound going out of the distortion. And so this is where the EQ comes in. And this is where I was kind of talking about like hardstyle techniques. This is something they use a lot to make those hardstyle kicks. And typically what they're doing is it's this and then like this 2 or 3 more times. But all it is we're using an EQ to kind of just focus the highs and the mids going into the distortion. So now you still get that big fat boomy boom happening in the low mid range. We're not getting rid of that. But now the lows or the highs and the mids can match that. And then after this, you can see we're just bringing out a bit more of that like kind of crunchy texture in the mid-range, as well as the boominess of the low end. And yeah, so again, it's not enough just to saturate it. You also gotta do these, because that's really gonna like kind of take it there, I think. And the saturator, also you can see we're using the hard curve setting. We got the drive up pretty high, and then I have a bit of drum bus. And then after that, rack. So that's, or that little audio effect rack there, I mean. That's doing most of the sound. Then we just have a compressor, which is sidechaining it to the kick. Just a little tiny bit, not that much. Like you don't even really notice it too much. It just keeps it a little bit cleaner there so the kick can come through. Then we have this EQ here cutting out below 30 hertz because you're not really hearing those frequencies, but they can make the mix really messy. And then we're just cutting at 100 hertz to make a little bit of room for the main kick. So that's how you do the distortion layer. So that's the first one. And then we have the kick, which you can see actually the kick is almost entirely dry. We're just pitching it a little bit. It's important to get this in key with the distortion. If I put this down -1, you'll notice. See how you have like kind of some weird dissonance happening there? And then when I turn it up, it's perfectly in key. So it's really important to make sure that these are in key. And then I also have an EQ on there just cutting out some of those low frequencies. And then on the group of these, we have a little bit of a low end boost just to kind of bring that out. And then I have this limiter here. So this is a really good technique, and kind of like the last step, I think that's going to be really important for this kick, is essentially limiting the bass and the kick together. It's doing essentially just a bit of compression to it, like you could really say. But if I turn this off, and then on, again off, and then on. There's just that certain kind of like gluing that you get, like that like pushing them together that this does, that you just aren't really going to get unless you do this. So I really recommend trying this. And this might seem wrong by audio standards, but it's like, dude, you're literally taking the 909 kick and distorting it to hell at this point. Like, I think the rules are kind of out the window. So it's like, might as well just do what sounds good rather than say, oh, you can't use a limiter on your kick. It's like, dude, it's just going to make it all sound a lot better. Might as well just go for it. And yeah, then we have our hi-hats. So it's 4 layers. So we have this one, which is the open hi-hat. You can see that's got a little bit of reverb, and I've shortened that a bunch. And then this little, just like hi-hat. Which if I play you just the open hi-hat on its own, this second hi-hat here is really just kind of like backing that up. But you'll notice if I play just the open hi-hat, and then I bring in the second one, again without it, with it. So you hear that, it adds a lot of punch to the sound. You know, having this little like underneath that very bright hi-hat is going to go a long way in terms of just making it like really hit. And the other thing is you want to think of it in terms of like the kick and the hi-hat groove, so that you need like an even punch to the hi-hat as you have to the kick. Because if you just, like if we just do the bright hi-hat, you can see when I bring in that second hi-hat, it makes you bob your head a lot more because now it's got the right groove because it's got the same amount of punch as the kick. So that's what you want to think about there. Then we have this hi-hat, just adding some brightness, just playing 16th notes. And then the last part of the hi-hats would be this old school rave loop. This is one of those classic 90s, early 2000s style loops like you hear in a lot of these tracks. And this is one of those things, you know, I try to do everything in MIDI programming, or at least just kind of like programming myself as much as possible. This is one of those things you really can't do that with. You kind of just have to get a loop and put that in there. And the reason why is because this is all about adding character and texture to the hi-hats. Like, these hi-hats sound good, but there's not a lot of character and texture happening there. It's just kind of like a 16th note hi-hat and then some hi-hats on the upbeats. But then when you bring in this loop, you know, it immediately just adds that certain groove that you just can't get unless you use a loop. So that's what we have this there for. And then just have that going through a high-pass filter. But really, like, there's nothing wrong with using loops, especially in this capacity where, like, obviously, like, you know, we're able to make good hi-hats here. It's not because I'm being lazy or because I don't want to do it or whatever. It's just because this is the only way to really get that quality of sound and get that texture and character in the track that's missing without it. And then the next thing we have down here are these little percussions. So if I play those with the groove of drums, you can really hear how they fit in. So the thing with the rest of the percussion that I've shown you so far, all these hi-hats, it's constantly going, just... These percussions are in here to sort of be something that's not going to be as constant, and it's just going to come in like once every bar, essentially. Or really once every 2 bars, because you can see it's kind of in between the 2 bars there. But yeah, it's just like that kind of dynamic of having some of your percussion that's just constantly repeating over and over, and then some of it that's just going to kind of come in and out like this. And so that's just going through a bit of echo and drum bus. And then we have this little effects loop. Which you can see is actually doing a bit of call and response with the percussions. So this one really just kind of illustrates that. Like, it's in there to show you, like, you know, if you have some percussions like this that are just coming in, like, kind of not constantly like this, but they're just like every now and then, like we were talking about, you know, you can have like another sound kind of play into that. So before it was just, but now we have, you know, so it just kind of gives you like a little bit more groove in the track. And so that's something you want to think about. It's not just about having this in there just to add an effects loop. It's in there because it's playing off of another element and it's adding to the overall groove. So everything is kind of talking to each other rather than just having a bunch of different sounds in there. And this is also just going through a bit of echo and drum bus, so kind of the same as the percussions actually. And then we have these little noise sweeps. So you can see this one just comes once every 2 bars. It's just a little bit of white noise with a band pass and then some erosion. And this one comes at the end of every 4 bars. And this is just kind of transitioning. But yeah, these are just meant to be, you know, those kind of nice background elements that are just going to kind of keep carrying it along. You might not always notice these the first time you listen to the track, but if we don't have these, the track is going to be missing something for sure, and it's not going to feel as professional and as full. So you want to make sure that you have at least something like these in there. Then we have this little stab, which sounds like this. Which, speaking of call and response, you can hear this. Of course, it just plays this one note in the middle of every 2 bars, but you can hear it's doing call and response with the lead down here. So I'm kind of thinking of it like that, not just in terms of just having like a in the middle of the beat everywhere. Although, if this was like the intro of the track, you know, just using the stab works great as well. So this is just one of those classic rave stab samples like you guys have heard in a million tracks. This is, yeah, one of the ones that I've heard all of these guys use in their tracks for sure. Like, I'm pretty sure this is the one in the most recent Wanderlust track. And definitely Dyen's used this a ton, and the other guys as well. all you really have to do for this, it's just about getting that cool classic stab sound. I recommend listening to a bunch of old 90s like jungle records and different techno records from that time, and just seeing what you can pull. And, also just using something like Rave Generator, like just finding these sounds and then just bringing them into the track, not messing it up. You can see we just have a little bit of reverb and a high pass filter, nothing too much that's going to get in the way of just like letting that sound shine, because it's really about the sound that's there, not like processing it and adding a bunch of stuff to it. Then the last thing down here is this lead. So here's the MIDI for this lead. It's not quite as crazy as you would think. It's all just in this D minor scale. So we're really just using a basic just D, the minor third, and then another D up there. And then these extra notes in here are just the ninth, which you can see is one note down from the minor third, and the fifth here, which if we look at like a basic D minor chord, it would be D, F, and A, the fifth. So we're really just using notes from like a D minor chord, but just kind of playing them in an interesting way. This is very Wanderlust-esque. And it just gives you like that, kind of dark, like spooky sounding melody. And I really love the intersection of like, obviously like very aggressive, distorted hard techno. But just bringing in this delicate little, it adds, it's all about like the juxtaposition. Like it's not just, yeah, let's see how aggressive we can make the techno. It's also like, okay, how can we combine different things? Sort of like, if you will, like feminine and masculine. Like, something that is very beautiful and something that is very like kind of mysterious and melodic with this just aggressive, hard-hitting, in-your-face, can't ignore it techno track. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here. It's not just how do we make a rumble cake, but also like really thinking like as if you're writing like, like poetry or something, not just how can we make an aggressive techno track. So with the sound with this one, it's just made with analog. We have 2 square waves, and what's happening with these is you can see we have 2 different LFOs on the pulse width, so it's giving that like a lot of movement, and it gives it that kind of more buzzy, like hard style type of lead. If we turn off the LFOs, you can hear it's a lot more flat, so those are important. And then those are going into a low pass filter with an envelope. You can see I'm also automating the filter, so it just makes the sound really dynamic, because it's kind of like opening up like that. And then the amp envelope is set very similar to the filter envelope. You can see we've got a bit of vibrato and some unison. And then the only effects on there, I just have a bit of reverb to give it some space, a bit of drum bus, which with this sound, I would use drum bus. You notice I'm not using it too much throughout here, because we don't actually need it that much to get the like very aggressive and distorted sound. But on something like a lead, it is really good. And then finally, I just have a high pass filter on there, cutting out the low end, making sure that this isn't going to get in the way of the kick or anything like that. And yeah, so that is it for the lead, and that is also going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp for just $5. It's a really great way to support me, helps keep me going, so I keep bringing you guys new videos every single day. I'm back to daily uploads again, so look out for that. And yeah, thank you so much for all the support, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.